Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt,
And my name is Jadrian.
And I'm Brian.
and big thank you to Brian O'Rourke for pitching the idea. And then the danger of always pitching an idea is we might say, "Hey, why don't you join us on what 2 hours notice or something like that?"
Sounds great. Log on.
Sounds great. Log on. Uh, but the We all just got back from Jet Set, and we have a recording coming out next week with Tom Flesher and Noah Trudeau on using escape rooms to provide some economic lessons to students. So stay tuned for the next one that will drop. But we had a little bit of a more timely one we wanted to drop, so we're kind of doing these a little bit out of order. But before we get to the conversation, what is the beverage of choice tonight for both of you?
Brian, guess.
Oh,
Guess
that's
first.
first, right? So I'm drinking a watermelon vodka cocktail that I made from a book that one of my daughters got my wife for her birthday. It's Tequila Mockingbird. So the drinks are all based on literature, and this one is called
Hmm.
The Brave New Swirl. Um, and it's vodka and watermelon and some mint simple syrup and lemon juice. It's a very good summer drink.
That sounds
Nice.
delicious. That's right up my. I would definitely drink that. Um, I have not been drinking. I know our normal rule is we have a non-alcoholic when you drink one earlier in the day. But given that we spent time at Jet Set, I think I'm still just sort of processing all of that. So I'm going with a non-alcoholic. It's the last one in the freezer, not last one in the fridge. The Electro Lime Circa de Cerveza, my last non-alcoholic Mexican lager.
Very nice. And I am going with one given to me just a few days ago by our super fan Tim Dye, informal guest of the podcast. Was kind enough before I left. He gave me a lift off from IPA West Coast style India Pale Ale from Daredevil Brewing Company. And big thanks to Tim, both naturally for the beer, for being a fan, but also he went through my Untapped to find what I had not had. So this is one I get to add to Untapped. That's very
That
cool.
that had to take him a long time.
He did say he found an IPA and then I'd had it, and then he found another one and I'd had it, and but but he did find one. So this is very cool to try a brand new IPA for me.
That was smart. I probably should have put those beers in the fridge, and they're sitting in my unpacked suitcase right now.
They'll keep. They'll keep. They'll be good for the next one. They'll be good for the next
So
one.
did you have to check a bag?
I always check a bag.
Okay.
I don't. I don't. I wouldn't. I would have had a carry on, but it was worth it for the beer. So we'll see. I guess I'm going to sip and we'll find out.
Yeah.
Sounds
Even if
delicious.
this is a terrible beer, it was still worth it. But I'm assuming it won't be terrible. But cheers.
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 Oh, that's a great beer. Whew, that is a good one. I'll
Well,
take
I
a
would
couple more
assume
sips.
if he's
Mm.
checking in on Untapped, he's not like getting you a 3.0 beer. It's got to have a good rating, and you haven't had it.
Yeah. No, that's a really good beer. I'm gonna have to take another couple sips before I figure out how high the rating goes on this.
What makes it a West Coast IPA?
Tastes
I'm
like
not I'm not an expert on this, but I think it's like West Coast is the same as a West Coast. Often if it's just called an IPA or if it's a West Coast IPA, it's different from a New England or a hazy.
Hmm.
So I guess the West Coast has less haze, more hops, I think.
just a different kind of hop. I think
Different
that's all.
hop.
It's a hop
Okay.
that's grown over there more commonly.
Okay.
Brian, I
So it's
made the joke that it tastes like grass. It usually has a very piney taste to it.
so it doesn't matter where it's made, but what it's made with.
I think it's a type of hop, yeah.
Okay.
I should know more about beer given
How
how
much you
much I
drink?
love
And
them
you
and
know what?
drink them.
Listen, since I went to grad school on the West Coast, that's what they drink that kind of IPA, which is
Yeah.
probably why I
I-
say that I hate IPAs so much. Because to me, IPAs are the West Coast IPAs.
Yeah.
The
Oh,
grassier the better is what they love.
the grassier the better. Yeah.
Ugh.
They're delicious. Love the taste. You can taste the grass almost. So on Friday, August 1st, new economic data came out. What the number for the jobs came in, and the previous 2 months of jobs were revised downward. The response to that by President Trump was actually to fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So there's a lot of calls now. There are a lot of economists. Good data is very important. A lot of calls like this isn't okay. Don't do this kind of don't do this essentially. Some discussion on what the claims are. Is the data from the BLS just the same? And we just thought it'd be a good chance to get together and discuss. This was the last day of our Jet Set conference, so I don't know how much everybody was focused in on the news that day versus the Jet Symposium conference. But I guess we could start. Brian, you proposed this. So, what were your first thoughts, right, when you thought, oh, we should talk about this?
Well, so you say that people weren't paying attention to the news at Jet. Somebody on the way in, so we had Jet at I think you guys have talked about this any number of times. We had Jet Set at the St. Louis Fed. And so on the way in the door, somebody, and since we're in the central time zone, we were on our, we could get the data like as we're walking in relatively early. And someone showed me the data, showed me the number, and I'm like, well, that's kind of a weird number because I think they had just released GDP numbers not too far, not too much before the unemployment numbers came out, and the GDP numbers were really good. And then the unemployment numbers after the revisions were not very good. They weren't negative, but they were just not as much as people were expecting. And then we went into Jet, and we didn't talk about what happened. I don't know what time of day the firing happened, but this is the idea of firing the messenger when the data is bad is from the perspective of someone who looks at the data regularly and counts on the data to give us an accurate picture of what's happening at the macroeconomic level. It's kind of it's startling, I guess, maybe to put a soft touch on it. It's hey, we've gotten bad data before. We've ever since they've been collecting this unemployment data and GDP data. There are always times when the data is bad, but you don't fire the messenger. And so this, of course, sets us down the road of a whole bunch of maybe conspiracy theories, but also legitimate concern about, all right, what's going to happen the next time there's bad data, or will there never be bad data again? And it's something that I think economists who rely upon data so much, this is something serious that the data, if you start to question the validity of the data and the integrity of the data, that can be really troublesome for research going forward and consequently for making good policy going forward.
I think it's important to note revisions are very normal. This is not I think that's probably the most surprising. So we talked about what we were hearing on Friday is I think we were, at least what I was listening to was in the pieces where it was, he's calling for the firing. And then by the afternoon, he has fired the person because of revisions. And I just remember sitting there and they were big revisions, right? And I think that's always what kind of, you said bad data. And so I know what you meant by it in the sense that they have to sample. I pulled up the number. They sample like 600,000 different like work sites to try to get this data. And surprise, not everybody turns in their surveys when they're supposed to. And so revisions to this data set you mentioned the GDP one, which I think was also a good one to talk about because I think that had come out a couple years ago where we had two negative quarters and then a couple quarters later, one of them wasn't negative anymore. Revisions are that's a normal part of data collection when you have a country this size. And so it's shocking.
Yeah, and I mean, no, and I remember them, gosh, it might have been about a year ago or so. They're revised most months because it's tough to be exact immediately. They always did seem to be revised downward traditionally, which actually posed a question. The revisions there weren't as big, but if you're collecting data and you're consistently having to revise downward, it does seem to be a problem, like in general, that there's some things to look at, but to the point, it is very common for them to be revised downward. I mean, I think the majority of months it was revised downward during the last year of the Biden administration. There'd be a report and then it'd be revised downward. And unless that revision gets a lot of press, which this one did get a lot of press, the revisions downward don't get much press. So it actually can be beneficial. I mean, oh, the jobs are really here. And then a month later, oh, they weren't really there. They were whatever they were.
Yeah.
So having it be revised downward does not seem anything out of the ordinary. So what, 79,000 jobs were added.
Well,
That
that's
or
the estimate, right?
73,000 jobs in July. The estimate, which
Yeah.
could be higher or
We'll,
lower,
we'll
right?
find out, right? But again, I think that's really important to say, right? We are estimating that many in the most recent one.
Mhm.
Well,
Yep.
truthfully, it will be revised
Yep.
in the coming months. And it's just a matter, right, of how large those revisions. Sorry, Matt, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're right though. 73,000 is the estimate for the most recent month. And then 250,000 jobs were revised downward from the combined months of May and June, which outside of COVID, it was the largest downward revision in employment figures since 1979. So
And
a pretty
honestly, I mean, in a sense of right, like if we're for people who are listening, it might be going like, why do they need to revise it? I think it's really important for people to remember that. Again, I'm going to emphasize the number because I think that helps because the BLS is one of the smaller organizations in this sort of in the scheme of the federal government. They do a lot of different things, and so it takes people time to respond. And there's a lot that's been going on with the economy over the past 2 months that maybe some of those work sites were not quick to focus on reporting job. That might have been lower on their to-do list, given all the other stuff that businesses are doing. So we're relying on private businesses who are working with the Bureau of Labor Statistics to respond to this stuff. And so it's very normal to have this. It's very interesting. So I found this quote, Matt and Brian, I wanted to share this with you. I wanted to hear if you think that this is, if you think this is too strong of a quote or too light of a quote. Jed Kolko, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, said that the firing was a, quote, five-alarm intentional harm to the integrity of U.S. economic data and the entire statistical system, end quote.
Initial reaction is that is an overreaction.
Okay.
And the reason I would say that is because the people who do those calculations, they're still there. They're still employed. At least, as of today, they're still employed. And most of the people at the BLS, they're career civil servants.
Yep.
So even the person who's taken over now has been there for a long time. They're not likely, I can't imagine they're likely to change their processes. They're just doing it under a different boss.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. This isn't good. I don't like this. This is another step by, I think it's not a good thing, right? It's the messenger came through with something. You don't fire the messenger, but I don't see this as the end of the accurate data at this moment in time. But there are some scary parallels, right? I mean, I can't remember if it was Lenin or Stalin, right? Executed somebody because of
Yeah.
reporting, accurately reporting birth rate data, right? I mean, this, and there's somebody in Greece who really had to evade arrest for many years from the authorities for publicizing accurate data. So
yeah, I used to work with someone in China or from China, and she was before she got into academia, she was employed by some statistical agency in China, and they said it's time for the GDP numbers to come out. Here's all the data, and they dropped these binders on her desk, and she's like, "There's no chance I'm going to go through all this data." And they said, "It doesn't matter. This is the number that it will be." So you get those kind of stories where the government or the party says this is the number, and this will be the number no matter what you find in these reams of data. It's just the when we rely on those data, but they're, again, let's go back to something I said earlier. When we rely on those big data sets and you can't trust the data, then you've got to, you just throw up your hands and say, whatever, we'll just keep doing what we're doing in the private sector and ignore the data that come out. But then it makes it harder for business to make decisions, and I think that's one of the other underlying problems here, even going to the micro level.
So for the 5 days before Friday, the S&P 500 was hovering around 6,400, 6,375. Oh, yeah. At 10 a.m., that fell down 200 points and ended the day 2.5% down. It'll be very interesting what happens tomorrow morning. This is, I guess, in those similar veins where we saw the tariff announcements, and then like the very next day, right, we would see these crashes come back down. I wonder if the replacement will actually maybe okay. I guess I should ask you, right? So, given that the replacement, the act, I believe his official title is acting
Mhm.
deputy commissioner. I think is the official title. Is it commissioner? Is that their
Yeah, yeah, that's
okay?
what they're called.
Given his experience at being in the BLS, will that make people feel better? Will that alleviate some of the concern, or is it just a matter of, I guess, waiting to see who he's replaced with? Or will people, I should rephrase that as, will people be nervous until he's has a permanent replacement? And then we see who it is and we either feel better or not. Matt,
I
do
imagine
you feel
not
better
much
that
would
it's a
change.
BLS person? I guess maybe that I'll go.
Yeah, I just don't imagine that much will change in the short term
Hmm.
from this. I so I guess I don't feel too bad.
Not
I mean,
sure
this
yet.
is not a person who I knew of before.
That's
And
how I
actually,
like all my government
Yes,
employees.
yeah,
I said that earlier today too. It's man, if you know who these people are, that's probably a bad thing.
I,
probably a bad
I
thing.
don't
Yeah,
want to know, and I'm saying this, and so we talked about this right before we started this episode. It turns out that the previous commissioner has a PhD in economics from Virginia Tech, and I did not know that. I don't want to know who
yeah,
these people are. That's my dream government employee. I
yeah,
don't want
yeah,
to know their names. I feel really bad. So somebody's going to hear this, and I have friends who work in the federal government.
yeah, yeah. But you just want them to do great work and not cause controversies, right?
Yes, I think that's
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I want to be surprised that I know where they got like that I have some sort of connection to them.
Hmm.
So,
So I think one of the things about this whole, kerfluffle or whatever you want to call it, is that I think there is a grain of something to work with. There's a kind of a grain of truth to Trump's concerns about the BLS and the way they do this calculation. Jadrian, you're probably more well versed about this than I am when it comes to the calculation of the unemployment rate. But it seems like when I was looking up some stuff before we got on here, and it seems like there hasn't been a lot of change to the way the unemployment rate is calculated. I mean, there have been some changes to deal with seasonality and that
Yeah.
as statistical techniques have gotten better. But we do live in a world where it seems like waiting as long as we have to wait to make these changes, it just seems like it could be done better. And so I think there might be a point there. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is, to my knowledge, there have not been a lot of changes to it. And I always used to go through the minutia of it with my students.
Yeah, they
Um,
love that.
well, no, but so I did
Wait,
it sort of, I did, yes. I didn't do it in the sense to test them. I did it in the sense to show them that for particular economic measures, it is purposely defined in such a like the parameters on defining who counts as employed and
oh,
unemployed are so strict, so that way it can be compared across multiple months, years, and things like that. And we would get into these really technical debates, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head. I was trying to look at it real quick. It was, if I remember at least what it was before, it was something like if you worked in the past week and earned at least $20. It was something shockingly low. It was like 20
yeah,
or
yeah.
$25. If you earned at least that much at a job, you were considered employed by the BLS standards. And
Mhm.
my students immediately were just like, that's wild. That's not a great, because in their mind, you need a certain amount of money to live and stuff. And I said, I agree. That is not a normal amount of money for people. I go, but it lets you keep this. If you change the definition,
Yeah.
then you can't compare across
can't come
time.
here.
And
Yeah.
so that sort of like detail is really important. And so I think that does scare a lot of economists when we start talking about what happens if we were to change a lot of these measures. How do we compare that across uh, older data sets? I'll give you an example that's not labor related, but this happened a couple of years ago. The Fed changed how they calculated M1 and M2. They basically said that, like, I think if I remember, and I'm not a Brian, you might remember this story. Basically, like so M1 and M2 are like two different groupings of money. M1, if I remember correctly, is like cash basically, and M2 was like checking accounts and cashier's checks and all sorts of stuff. And basically, the Fed came out and said, there's really no reason to distinguish between these two. They're both super liquid. But
Yeah.
what ended up happening right after it is if you looked at the data for M1, because they lumped in M2, it like shot it like way off the chart. And then all these
Sure.
people who did not know that the Fed had changed the definition started talking about how the Fed was printing more money than it ever printed in its life. And look at this data.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, they just changed the definition, but people don't they don't hear about the change. It's like teaching, right? You make an announcement about a change, and a student goes, "Well, you didn't say that." And you go, "No, I announced it last week. You didn't listen to
Yeah.
me."
Well, I mean, that change I think makes sense. I mean, if without looking through my old macro notes, and it's been about a year, so I think M1 is checking account, cash, and then some other incredibly liquid. Savings was M2, but now for
Now
most
it's
people, converting savings to
Yeah,
checking,
say it.
it's
Okay.
a
so
one
easy.
button push, right?
Yeah.
So that's a change that makes some sense on the definitions, and I think what you say though makes sense on the definition of, other than adjusting for inflation, I think it makes sense on the definition
So
for
I'm curious, right?
employee.
If we were to change the definition of, say, even CPI, right? So other things that BLS does, CPI,
Hmm.
the unemployment rate. Do we need an update? Probably. I mean, probably, right? Yes, probably. The economy is very different than it was before. Will people understand that a change was made in how it was calculated and then be able to sort of adjust between those? And then the question turns into, how does that misunderstanding affect the way people invest, save, businesses hire if they don't understand why things are changing?
But, I mean, it's a good question on that. I mean, what changes are needed, I think, is an interesting question, or what maybe not are needed, but what would be the best criticisms of the way the BLS has done things? Like if you were trying to make the argument, it looking through across, if you don't know much about this issue, it's economists on both the left and the right are chiming in, right? Like the
Mhm.
American Enterprise Institute is more right leaning, and they're critical of this move. So it's not just it's this is a bipartisan, you know, agitation, I guess, on the move. But Brian, I'm curious of like I've seen one thing that points to like a decrease in the way the BLS could accurately report data, and that is the survey response rate,
Mhm.
which took a dip during COVID from about 60% to closer to 40%. The which could affect the accuracy of initial estimates, right? I mean, that's it's not ideal. I don't know what you do around that. I don't think it's warrants a firing, but that's one of the kind of that's the one thing I've seen in terms of a criticism of like, this isn't as ideal. The other one that I could come up with is the fact that consistently they have to revise it downward. Maybe after some point in time, maybe it's just bad luck, right? Every now and then, if you flip a coin 10 times, you're going to get 10 heads in a row, but you know, it's not likely, so you should maybe take a deep look and see, are we coming up with the wrong estimate? Brian, I'm curious what your thoughts are on.
Uh, so what I would like to see, if there are going to be changes made, I'd just like to see the reporting happen more timely so that we get the data. We're not waiting for the stragglers. I mean, there's got to be, I mean, for all that the government is doing now to try to incentivize behavior, and I don't want to, I'm probably walking a tightrope here, but to incentivize universities to do certain kinds of things and engage in behavior that they find valuable. By they, I mean, government officials just say, look, this is the deadline, and if you don't get it in by this deadline, there'll be some sort of penalty, and we can expedite the collection of that data. I mean, one of the so when I used to teach this in class, I used to teach it in principles because I found it so fascinating. But talking about the calling up of the households to find out what's the labor status. That's got to be a totally arcane way of collecting that data now because so many people don't have landlines, they have caller ID, they don't recognize the number, they just don't answer the phone. And so tracking that household survey has to just be I can't imagine it's as accurate as it used to be. But there's got to be, I mean, it just seems to me that there is a way. They've got so much data on so many people and businesses that we could speed up the collection process. That's what I would like to see. Maybe not change the way it's done, but change how frequently the data is collected.
Yeah.
I mean, how much time really does it take a business to say, hey, call HR, how many people have we hired, and how many people have we let go, and let's just send that information along.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, except the government does ask for 8 million things, and the more
Yeah,
it asks for those
yeah,
regulations.
Every single month they ask you for that thing, along
yeah,
with other stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, and then yeah, I'm stammering here because I don't know of an easy solution to this. The more the government comes in and regulates, the more I think it helps the big entrenched incumbents, which
Hmm.
decreases competition, which is a bad side effect. But timely data is helpful. But it's a fair question. What's the cost of us having to wait an extra month or so to find out what really happened with the jobs numbers?
I think in the past the cost was not very high. Now things move so much more quickly. Investment decisions are, if I'm thinking about investing, I want to know, investing in the sense of, all right, I'm going to build a new, factory or a new
Or
data center or something like that. It would be good to know those things take a long time. If I want to get started soon, it'd be good to know something about the trend of employment maybe a little bit sooner, or maybe not. Maybe it doesn't matter if I'm going to put that much money into something. I'm going to do it regardless of what the unemployment number is.
Well, I think, but I don't know that the national number is the number you necessarily care about. So,
Ah,
right, the BLS reports also regional and state level data, and that's really, this might go back to Matt's level. This is the tough part, right? They release so much data, right? Where
uh-huh.
you're looking at MSA level unemployment rates, job market characteristics, CPIs for some places. Those are very valuable, right? To regional businesses that are thinking,
Mhm.
do I want to expand in this area? What's the regional output of these? And we're asking, I mean, to be fair, what gets broadly reported are the national numbers, but all of those numbers matter to some sort of level in different places. And so one way you could obviously speed things up is not provide as much data. I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think exactly what you just said, Brian, because the national numbers don't matter as much to a regional company that's thinking about investing or expanding somewhere else. They care about what's happening where they're at. But getting more data means you got to bug companies more or households more, and that's not going to work. I don't know. I don't have a. I can't imagine a good answer
Well,
other
I think,
than some sort of weird tech answer that I'm not familiar with.
yeah. I mean, I think maybe the heart of all this is that if there was a good answer, it would have been found by now, and you know, it hasn't been found.
yeah, yeah.
So I got one other question for you. It's sort of a broad macroeconomic question. So there's been, the Trump administration wants lower interest rates. And what is this is a softball question. What are the two things that can lead to lower interest rates when it comes to the Fed making their next decision?
Uh, Jadrian's laughing because he hasn't taught macro in a while. So I don't know that I'll get this right, but I would say that, Jadrian, do you want to answer or are you good with me
Go ahead.
taking my guess?
No, I mean
Um,
I don't know the official answer, but I'm sitting here going,
well,
everything the Fed chair says is that he wants certainty in markets. And they look at labor markets and they look at the unemployment, like they're looking at these things to say, this is how we're going to decide whether to cut rates.
yeah, if you want lower interest rates, like the Fed to lower, they
Hmm.
might lower if the job market looks weaker
Hmm.
because, and
Right.
they might lower it if inflation is lower, right? Like because
Yes.
those I would think would be the two
Those
factors.
are the two easy answers. So Trump gets a terrible jobs data
The Fed
number.
should lower
The
rates
Fed
more.
should lower rates, which is exactly what he wants, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I
But
mean, I think inflation is kind of leveled off. I'm not sure. I mean, we probably will see an uptick with tariffs, but there is a much better case to be made for the Fed cutting interest rates with a bad unemployment number. And he just got that and then fired the messenger.
I do believe I think this also happened, I think, while we were at Jet Set. I guess they met, the Board of Governors met,
Hmm.
and there was more dissension than in the past. I believe they had,
Yeah. Two,
two,
two
right?
Trump appointees dissented,
Oh.
but there's still 10 other people who are saying that, we're going to just hold the line.
No, but I mean, this is the thing, right? Chairman Powell talks about needing some certain, right? I mean, those things matter, but certainty and being able to
Right.
predict the future. If you're firing people who are collecting the data that you're supposed to be using,
Hmm.
that makes you
Yeah.
question.
So say the next unemployment number comes in and there are, 200,000 fewer jobs than the month before. Like, who's going to believe that number?
There's 200,000
What
jobs.
Oh,
if? What if?
yeah,
Yeah.
what if? What if there's 200,000 fewer jobs next month than there were this month?
Uh,
Does the Fed look at that number and say, "Oh no, the economy's falling off a cliff. We need to lower interest rates as soon as possible"? Or do they just say, "We're not sure we can believe that data"? I mean, that it
I
makes it so much harder for policymakers.
yeah, it's interesting though. I don't think.
Or say in 6 months, say in 6 months that
Yeah,
number comes in.
well, this data is, gosh, though, that's not the direction because officials generally want to tout a stronger economy. That's not the direction. If there was political influence, I would expect the bias.
Right.
Right.
Or you,
But if you want to cut interest rates and you have I'm like just an apocalyptic job number released by the BLS for the purpose of pushing the Fed.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, it's
those are the discussions we didn't have last month or last year because everyone believed the data. And
yeah.
that's the
No,
concern, right?
it'll be an interesting point. I mean, you raise a good point. Like, what would have the optimal response been by
Hmm.
Trump to this if he wants interest rates lowered? And I hadn't really thought of this by now, but you raise a good point. The optimal response might have been, um, we're doing all we can. We're putting it, like I don't want the tariffs, but obviously the president does, and we're putting in tariffs, and it's going to help, but the interest rates are holding us back, and that's why
Yeah.
we saw this. We need to cut. We need the cut now. Don't wait, right? Like
That
that would
I
have been
totally
the
agree with you.
argument.
That would have been a much more palatable argument for, I think, for economists than to say that number's garbage. I'm going to fire the fire the
Yeah,
BLS
I mean,
head.
a lot of economists who wouldn't want the rate cut, who previously didn't, that would have been be
Oh
a tougher
yeah.
one to argue against.
Hmm.
That's a great
I
point
talk to
you
people
raised,
about
Brian.
this. I talk to people about this monthly. About, hey, what's the Fed going to do? What's the Fed going to do? I'm like, based on history and where the numbers are right now, they're going to hold it steady. And but when you see an unemployment number like the one that just came out, it's harder for me to say, oh, they're just going to hold it steady. This is a case for lowering the rates now.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, this is the part I don't think people realize that a roaring economy is good in some senses, but it means you're not going to get the other thing that you want. Like there
Right.
is this trade-off. You want low interest rates. I do too. I would love to refinance this mortgage. Um, but that also means that the economy has to slow down. You can't have these really low interest and this just blazing
Well,
hot
I mean,
economy.
you can
You can.
with if it's but you need the basically the supply side growth, right?
Yes.
I mean um, but this is yeah, it's an interesting that's a great point on this. So, like,
Oh, that's good.
other other thoughts on Bureau of Labor Statistics or anything with this before we move on to the pop culture of the week?
I mean, my thought is who's next? I mean, he's
Oh,
been hinting
yeah.
at Jerome Powell, right? He's stuck, so that's some good
Yeah.
news. Um, right? What other messenger? I can't imagine any like government employees right now going, I have to deliver something coming up in the next couple months that's either not going to be good or not what they want.
So
I don't
who's
know.
is it the Bureau of Economic Analysis that does GDP?
Yeah.
Now GDP was good most recently, so they might be sleeping a little bit better, but the BLS, at least you're dealing with inflation and unemployment. So you've knocked the person who's in charge of that. You've gotten rid of two of those.
Yeah, I was just looking to see if there were betting odds, if you could place a wager on who would, but there doesn't seem to be at least an easily Googleable market on that, but
Hmm.
that's
Who is
good.
the head of the BEA? Let's learn their name just so we can talk about them now, just in case we need to.
They probably went to Susquehanna.
I don't know how to say. I'm not going to try to pronounce this name. This is I don't want to make a mistake. So I'm gonna look at the name now. That way I'm ready
Yeah,
when the
that's good.
conversation happens.
So, Brian and Jadrian, any pop culture for the week?
Okay, I've got one.
Awesome.
All right. So One of our favorite movies around Christmas is National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Love
Uh,
that.
And I learned this at Jet. It's an old media, so I have to set it up a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. There's this scene where Clark finds out that Cousin Eddie has no presents for his kids. And so he's talking to his wife, and they're like, "Oh man, I can't believe he has no presents for his kids. How can he have not been able to find a job in like the last 7 years?" And Ellen says, "Well, he's been holding out for a management position." And so, when I talk about the different kinds of unemployment, I use this example all the time because it's talking about, not someone who's structurally unemployed, but someone who's frictionally unemployed. It's basically he can find a job, but he chooses not to take what's available for him.
I do not have that on my Econ Media library, and that is such an amazing clip. I'm gonna now great. Now I'm gonna have to go watch Christmas Vacation and find this scene.
record.
That's
It's
a
close
good
to it's close to the middle of the movie.
Yeah, no, I know
Yeah.
exactly what it
I've
is.
seen that a bunch of times. I mean, I remember exactly that
No,
part.
like as you're saying it, I'm like, yeah.
And I
no,
never
know this.
connected like I need to show this to students. This is frictional. That's fantastic. That's really fantastic.
I love that.
Uh Jadrian,
Matt,
any
yeah, I'll squeeze in. I'll put it in this same vein, except I don't know that I would call it pop culture. But since Brian's talking about unemployment, I'll share. I tried to look real fast to see what I was using in my class. One of my favorite stories, again, not pop culture at all, but it's just a funny story. When Oregon legalized marijuana, there was a big news article that drug dogs were being laid off and forced into retirement because their services were no longer needed. And I learned a lot about this. It was very interesting. I did not realize that dogs are trained to smell certain types of drugs and not other ones. And so there are dogs that can smell marijuana but not cocaine, and
hmm.
bomb sniffing dogs are different. And the article talks about how you can essentially, right, you can't retrain these dogs to do something else. And so I would use this story when I was teaching unemployment, in the sense that they lost their job because they are it's an evolving market. The structural change
Structural, yeah.
has happened, and their services are no longer needed, and they can't go somewhere else.
No, I'll go a different way with the the accusations of malfeasance. Um, One of the Game of Thrones clips where actually it's the best Game of Thrones clip, or it's the best clip I've ever heard for explaining how a loan works. But in the same clip, uh, Tyrion gets the books. As he's now, I think he's Lord of Hand to the King, the Hand. And so he says, like, for years I've heard that Littlefinger's a magician. Um, when the crowd needs money, it comes out of nowhere. And so somebody asks him what he was stealing it, and he goes, worse, he's borrowing it. But just about, it's a little bit about the nature of like, okay, these things were happening. You didn't quite know how the spending was all going on. And yeah, in terms of thinking through cries of malfeasance and firing officials and all of that just seems to be somewhat relevant. But also a fan. It's the best clip. It's the only clip I know of that really explains well how a loan works. So if anybody's got to teach about loans or interest or anything like that. So, well, thank y'all for the conversation today. Thank you to everybody for listening. Appreciate all of the support. Appreciate, it was great to see some people on Jet Set who talked about how much they loved, a few of some of the episodes that they listened to. And we love comments. 5-star reviews will help the algorithms push this to more people. And so, Jadrian and Brian, before we go, how were the drinks?
Delicious.
Gone.
Yeah, I've got a sip left, but any final words of wisdom for the audience?
Got nothing. I'm excited for the next episode of this podcast for people to listen to.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks,
Cool.
guys. It's good talking with you.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for coming. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.